and he is
I know
coming from
Trevor.
the late lamented Beams and Struts label. Beams and Struts for several years was like the best online integral theory journal that intersected integral theory with other forms of philosophy, theology, sociology. The archives are still up, worth checking out. I'll probably throw up here a link here in a second. But coming all the way from Vancouver, Trevor, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Oh, it's great to see you, Trevor.
Yeah. So,
well, I've actually never interacted with you before, other than I've read things of yours online. Because, and Mike mentioned this just a second ago. For those people that are intricate in like spiral dynamics, integral philosophy, and stuff, and you have a more progressive politics, sometimes you get irritated the way they transcend and include global capitalism. Your work is one of the places that push back on that, and I've always appreciated the internet voice. Well, now your beard's even more impressive.
Well, it's an honor to be here, Tripp. I just want to tell you that I entered seminary 5 years ago, and I'm a little sick, so forgive my voice. But 3 years before that, I'd come to the faith. In my first year in seminary, I was told about homebrewed Christianity, and I've been listening ever since. For the first 3 years, I was on the bus. I had an hour ride to campus, and I was on the bus every morning with headphones. So it's just been a great gift. So thanks for what you guys have done there.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. All right. A little bit about you, Trevor, so we can say a little more about you before we enter into the fray here. He grew up in Victoria, in Canada, did his BA and MA in philosophy, and is now wrapping up his MDiv at the Vancouver School of Theology on an ordination track with the United Church of Canada, where he's doing some interesting potential things, I believe, with alternative new monastic community. And as he just mentioned, Trevor is a longtime homebrewed Christianity deacon, and he's one of my go-to guys, just like Tripp said, for looking at integral theory through a more sort of radical political and theological lens. So I'm glad you're here.
Thanks. It was very generous. I got a couple questions for you, Tripp. Maybe we'll see if we'll get to both of them, and maybe you'll see a bit of my or hear a bit of my integral background here. But and maybe these are 101 questions, so I apologize if that's the case. First, I want to ask you about, and some of these themes have already come up in the event today, about the sort of so-called scandal of particularity. So the idea that Jesus, was a one-off event. I sort of see Jesus more as a sign from our collective future, sort of an expression of where humanity might go and who we might become. And when Paul says things like, putting on the mind of Christ, I take it that he thinks that we're capable of such a thing. Yet many of the Christians I'm around, and this is in Canada and sort of Protestant mainline Christianity, and a lot of, very educated, great folks, they seem to still externalize Jesus. Mike said earlier about this, he said, maybe it even could be called idolatry. I don't not necessarily have to go that far, but they seem to externalize it and look at it outside rather than as an invitation for us to become. Now, maybe we're not all going to be the full capital I incarnations, but can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I maybe three things. One, I differentiate the incarnation from incarnational, but I don't think that unsays what you just said. It's just one of those weird places that, as a philosophical theologian, I get annoying to most of my friends that think it's annoying. But one thing, and this I'm actually interested in how you respond because the way you asked the question. What I wanted to do in even organizing the book is, and I'll use spiral colors, and if you don't like it, next people are watching, don't worry, the next person we won't do this with. Chapter 1 is directly written for blue meme people, and it's done so in a communitarian way that embraces postmodern criticism at Green. It is the absurdity of the affirmation of Jesus as the Christ is a way of lowering the anxiety of people that are wondering whether or not what I'm going to be doing and that kind of thing. It's a way of identifying the confession, anticipating a criticism to the Enlightenment, so it's not the final word. But the opening chapter is very much a trying to state the uniqueness about Christology and Jesus in a way your blue meme would resonate within you. And then the next 3 chapters are definitely orange meme related things, locating Jesus in his history, locating the historical Jesus and his ministry as a dynamic, genuine spiritual reality that brings about an evolution of religion, culture, and society, which is the dropping the G chapter, which is a revisioning of our understanding of the ultimate. And then the next two chapters after that in which the atonement chapter is a rereading of medieval and Reformation atonement theories to cohere with a postmodern understanding of the inherent violence of the tradition without dismissing the tradition, so that hopefully more traditional people would hear their tradition handed back to them with the critiques done but not directly stated. Then the next two chapters are green meme address things around politics, identity politics, difference and such, and it concludes in addressing the constant questions of the day around economics and ecology. And a prophetic call to the life of the church is to actually be a heretic to economism, totalitarianism, authoritarianism, patriarchy, and this kind of thing. So the movement of the book was written and kind of follows my own movement in a sense, reflecting back of my movement in the spiral itself in the at least the line of development Christologically. So in that sense, some of the way things are phrased early on are intended to leave a question untouched until it gets to it. So like prior to addressing the kingdom, patriarchy, and hierarchy part, it's called kingdom. And then after that, it doesn't. But it's because I wanted the transition of that idea to be deconstructed by Jesus through his actual teaching and practice, as opposed to seen as deconstructed by the author being just slapping people around, telling them they should get on my really enlightened spot or something like that. Anyway, that was the Tripp's attempt at spiraling the book. I'm interested if in any response and such.
Yeah. I think that's beautiful. I think I might just add a potential, whatever, turquoise, who knows, whatever, around participatory eschatology or that it is, when Jesus calls us to reconcile, to forgive, like these are things we actually have to do. Maybe that seems obvious, but I don't see it often in church life enough. And it seems like we kind of externalize this greatness onto someone else when this is a path. It's a path like the liberation paths in the East. They talk about moksha and a path, and this is our path. And, it's hard, it's difficult. I'm as broken as anybody else, but just, I want to be called into trying to live that life rather than saying, yeah, it happened once, That's all.
No, I agree. I love that. I'm resonating with it. So
great. Well, let me quickly
ask the other 40,000 words. We should put it in. All right.
Yeah. No, let me
go to your next question.
Yes, you betcha. And might fill the time here, but so I want to ask you. You mentioned that some of the Christology from a cosmic perspective got pulled out, and I kind of want to ask how you view Christology from a processor, from a cosmic scope, but with a particular focus on how do you communicate to the postmodern mind that's very wary of notions of progress and teleology, and rightly so. I mean, we know that modernity used along with the church for colonial capitalist endeavors. We want to be very wary of that. Yet at the same time, it seems to me the Bible is strictly, it's a teleological vision. From end to end. So how do we reconcile our wariness? This kind of come up earlier today in the calls as well. How do we reconcile our wariness towards these notions, yet re-yoke to a book that seems to be just filled with that vision?
When it goes to Scripture itself, I think it's important to read and interpret Scripture as our history of engaging in this developmental process, recognizing that there are dignities and disasters in each turn. And that there's a temptation for me to want to never read certain passages of Scripture, and there's quite a few of them. But what are we accomplishing in and avoiding it? Are we denying that dark side, that shadow lurks in us as an individual, as a church, as a people? So one of the places in Christology that pressing on that is making sure we differentiate the kingdom of God from the church. and that the church does not possess the kingdom. The kingdom is calling forth, prodding, begging the church to participate, but they're not the same thing. And the kingdom is essentially bigger than the church. The other place that I think when it goes to looking at this, the problem around teleology, is to recognize that whatever Jesus thought it was, and it ends up leading to a cross, the disciples who were hanging out with him got it wrong. One of the things I love emphasizing in the book is how Peter gets the title right. He's like, excuse me, sir. The answer would be the Christ. He asks, who do you say I am? And then the next day, he's like, Jesus, like, get behind me, Satan. Because Peter's saying, no, the Messiah is not the one who goes into Jerusalem and faces off nonviolently with the principalities and powers of the day. You're going to get yourself killed. Let's go around and wait till we get enough followers to really take this government out and put our own in. And so to me, there's this, the gospel itself insists that the teleology, if we want to talk to one, is more an affirmation of hope rather than the possession of a destination. It's more of an insistence on remaining open than than fidelity to some particular form of closure or embodiment. But the teleological press back of kind of different forms of postmodern criticism is very important, because what's being criticized is when the church gave birth to an economic system and a political system that was no longer subject to religion, that it becomes these separate things. We become individuals when we participate religiously and economically. And then there's this mysterious sovereignty of the market that are making our relations take place. And that somehow got baptized into the teleology of the church's mission and progress. Yes, I'm glad we have dentists and penicillin. But I think there is a way of recognizing both the critique of postmodern critiques of teleology, while also recognizing that the problem with teleology is the power its discourse does. And so you can start to address the question of power without giving up on the teleological hope as it functions in the teachings of Jesus. And I think actually that's one of the benefits of a kind of spiral dynamics or integral view, is it recognizes that the everyone's right in some way, but and so you have to figure out how to include all these different voices, but also to know that there's more to the story, and how is it that we that the critique of teleology and trajectory and things ends up impacting our confidence as a church, that we have to figure out how to embrace and engage that criticism without silencing it, but also without ceasing to speak, I think.
Yeah. We're in a fun situation, Tripp. We have an extra 10 minutes here, so I'd love to keep Trevor on and keep the conversation going if that works.
Yeah, that's a great answer, and very helpful. I'm glad this is recorded, because I'm going to go back to some of the points you made there in the future, because it is true, once you see from an integral perspective, it's not hard to make that move at all. But I want to also figure out my own ministry and my own writing, how to communicate. But you talked about openness, hope, receiving the kingdom. I think these things can be very helpful to sort of turn people back, towards that. I don't have a ton else to say. I do have one quick question. Yeah,
go for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'd be curious. One of the things I've noticed in seminary and sort of in the Christian circles I run in is sort of a bit of a resistance to comparative religion. And I was a seeker in my 20s, and I only came to, I'm 42, came to faith at 33 in the Christian faith. So I kind of came through Joseph Campbell, Messiah Elad, and Ken Wilber, and the perennialist Houston Smith before I got to Christianity. So, and I can see, when I sit in class, I can see, and I traveled to India and did Buddhist retreats and all that stuff. And I can see comparative possibilities that don't frighten my faith. They kind of strengthen them. There's a great paper by Andrew Sun Park, who I know you guys have had on the show. And he talks about the theology of the way of Christ. I'm sorry, the Tao of Christ, And because he grew up in a Buddhist tradition, but I was also trained in Christianity, he really sees how, the overlap between the way and then the Christ's way. So I just, and I don't want to get into a pluralistic mushiness either. I want to keep that particularity. I love Brian McLaren's line of a generous orthodoxy, but I'm just wondering how you see, how you use comparative religion, I suppose, in your workings with Christology, and maybe what about some of that resistance might be. I don't know.
Oh, I think that's a great question. And if I'm assuming a certain kind of integral vibe to things, I would say that one of the ways as a Western philosopher in a monotheistic tradition, I've kind of pushed back or critiqued kind of the general integral approach. It's real similar to Steve McIntosh's new book.
Right.
And I essentially substitute Whitehead for C.R. Bindu and Ken Wilber's metaphysical confidence once he leaves the sciences behind. Religious pluralism is it recognizes for Whitehead there's a difference between ultimate reality and ultimate actuality. There's a difference between God and creativity. Creativity, in Whitehead's thought, is the principle of identity. It's that which, when one comes attuned to it, you are enlightened. That the Eastern religious traditions and the contemplative ones are very much attuning oneself to the liberation that comes through enlightenment. And that's not to be what you call like pluralistically muddied up with this prophetic secularizing, not secularism, but secularizing of this prophetic move of God on the world. And that God and creativity, when separated, become mutually transforming ways of engaging in deep religious, spiritual, communal experience. Because reality matters ultimately to God, because God given God's own life into the world. The prophets speak of God's pathos and passion for justice and desire. Jesus came embodying and taking up sarks and suffering and death into the heart of God. So how can you kind of hold them together? The temptation, I think, for pluralistic intuitions, which are really positive, is to try to create this new sameness.
Right.
And I would rather say that ultimate reality or creativity, it calls forth a contemplative seeking after enlightenment response, and God is seeking after the transformation of the world, ultimate actuality and process thought. And so then our conversations among religious traditions are actually conversations connecting and being transformed by wisdom developed over time and in history. What it actually, the coolest part about it for me, right, is what I want to do in the book is to say, Christology, the church's reflection on Jesus, has a really huge, deep richness that so many Christians miss and avoid and ignore because of stupid Jesus as Lord, liar, lunatic crap. And go, oh, look at this big story. And the truth is that every wisdom tradition has this beautiful, intricate, deep story in it. And the temptation for us when we want a socially palatable answer to the pluralism question is to throw every wisdom tradition in the flatlands and label them the same.
Yeah. And
that, to me, is scary because there's so much depth to be gained elsewhere. And so my goal is like to show this deepness. This is just in how the church has thought about Jesus fit into 40,000 words, unable to use really nerdy words. Just imagine how much each wisdom tradition contains in it.
Beautiful.
That was the pedagogical performance of the book, at least.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
So for you, Tripp, it sounds like the richness occurs in the encounter of difference rather than trying to, make all of these traditions say the same thing in slightly different ways.
Yeah.
And Trevor, I'm curious how you would respond to your same question, because you've obviously given this a good deal of thought in your context.
Yeah. I think where I come up from more sort of neo-Orthodox Christian perspective, where I found a connection there is to, and Tripp was saying this earlier, and I need to really go in depth in that chapter, but to go from a bit of a logos theology, or to, if God is one, infinite, the creator, and the logos or wisdom or the Christ has been there since the beginning of time, that means it's been accessible to all humans. And so I want to take that panoply of richness in. I also want to go into a particular tradition with a 2,000, 3,000 year old history and go into those specific particular rituals. But I just think it's kind of weird, to not, if we see God, metaphysically in this way, to not think that people have been imbibing on him for a long time, or him, her.
Yeah. The way I see it, like all of our religious traditions arise as a response to the felt needs of the context that they're given, and depending on your sort of teleology, divine revelation. And for us, it seems like the ecological urgency that's in front of all of us right now is this sort of eschatological moment, maybe even a catastrophic moment. But like, to me, it's all hands on deck. Like, what is the best that those of us in the Jesus lineage can bring to bear on this alienation that we're feeling from ourselves, from each other, from our sense of the divine, from our world? And, what is it that we can marshal? And I also want to hear what other traditions can marshal. So it's no time to, dumb things down. It's time to be bringing our A game, but in a spirit of generosity and collaboration rather than fear and kind of othering.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And, there's that prophetic vision throughout the whole text is towards all the nations. All the nations are going to come together. Isaiah, all the way to the end of Revelation. And here we are. And the earth's pushing all the nations together. So this is our moments to pick up our prophetic heritage and try to make it work.
Totally. It reminds me of an Old Crow Medicine Show song that I'm going to post in the comments. I hear them all.
Virginia Creeper?
Huh?
I said Virginia Creeper. You said Old Crow Medicine Show song.
Yeah. I hear them all as the song, actually. But,
Chug along like an old Virginia Creeper.
Well, Trevor, thank you so much for joining us today. I look forward to hearing your write-up, any further developments or thoughts that you have in post-production.
Thanks to both of you, and I look forward to hearing the rest.
All right, thank you.